black skin, you can't see it turn red, so thank you.
Now, I could be jumping to major conclusions here, Monica.
Yes.
I'm getting a sense from your Twitter feed that you're not a fan of Brexit.
No, I think it's one of the catastrophes of the 21st century, probably the 20th as well. It's insane. And I've lived in the United Kingdom for 30 years, half my life. 33 years, let's see, half my life, just about. And I've never seen a country like this before. I don't know what to make of it, and I don't quite understand everything now. It puts you in a place where, it's sort of like being involved with somebody for decades, and suddenly, they walk into your house one day, and you think, who is that? And that's what it feels like now.
So why did the British people, 52 to 48, decide to make this big change? Because they are famed for preferring the status quo and incremental change. This is a big change, and they voted for it. Why do you think they did it?
I think partly austerity really broke a lot of people. I think partly it was a personal slap to David Cameron, who campaigned for Remain. And also, along with George Osborne, was one of the architects, or not the architect, of austerity. So it was a way, I think, I don't want to psychoanalyze the nation because...
we don't have that time.
No, we don't. But Britain's been very nice to me, and I love the United Kingdom very much, and it's one of the reasons I feel so dismayed about it. I think people were just saying no. I think they were saying no about everything that they thought the establishment wanted. I think, and I mean, not to put the people down, because of course they thought about it at home as much as I thought about it. But I think partly underneath it is just a big fat no, just no. And I was up in Boston in the north and pointed out to this audience I did any questions with, that I said to them this was the second Boston I've ever been in. The first was, of course, Massachusetts, and that their people founded that town. And one of the reasons they did is so they could have a better life for their children and for themselves. So surely they understand that too, and they did. But I think underneath it, just like the Trump voters, there's just a big no, basically.
So where does the UK go now? It looks as if Brexit is going to happen, though it could be reversed, I suppose, depending on the result of the general election. Assume for a moment it goes through. Assume for a moment that the Boris Johnson administration is retained. Where do you think the country goes to then, and how does it heal this serious division?
I think, I'm not an economist, Joseph, but I think the economy will go down for a while, and the country's strong, so it'll find somewhere to come back up. But it will be enthralled to the United States of America, which it believes that it has a unique relationship with. But of course, the United States of America has a unique relationship with several nations. Of course, one of them is Ireland. And the British don't know that, and they don't believe it. So when President Obama said you'd be at the back of the queue for trade deals, it will happen, because the Congress of the United States, under Article 2 of the Constitution, has the absolute authority to make deals with foreign countries. And of course, the Congress of the United States is Irish. So if anything happens that would hurt the Good Friday Agreement, hurt the Republic in any way, they've already said it's not going to go through. And the British don't seem to hear that, and that's what makes me more nervous than anything else.
They heard it from you. When you said that, and you got the audience reaction you did, was there anything afterwards from people saying, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the Irish community in the US could stymie our much vaunted trade?
I've been saying this on Twitter for about 2 years. And
not every lead voter follows you.
No, this is true. But I have been saying it. I think that audience in particular were, I think, too embarrassed to say anything. I know a lot of them are sitting there sort of shocked. And that's an area that's remained as well. But I think the deeper thing, Joe, is the lack of understanding, the lack of knowledge, the lack of acceptance of the Republic as a separate entity from the destiny of the United Kingdom. I think think if you ask people on the street, they say, of course it's a separate country. But I tweeted something that Samuel Jackson said when a young English reporter said to him, what do you think of Colin Farrell? Colin Farrell's hot now, isn't he? And Samuel Jackson said, yeah, isn't he hot in the United Kingdom too? And she said, oh, we don't talk about it because he's one of ours. And Samuel Jackson said, I thought he was Irish. And she said, oh, he is, but Ireland's next to us. And Samuel Jackson said, see, that's your problem. People think you own people, and you always claim people that don't belong to you. So that's kind of the attitude that I think unconsciously a lot of them has about Ireland.
Is there a relationship between African Americans and Irish? And I read your piece in New European a month ago, in which you described some of the anger that Irish people enacted on Black Americans.
Yes.
A century ago and far more recent.
Yes.
So what kind of relationship is there between Irish Americans and African Americans?
My late father, worked on the assembly line just about all of his adult life, making cans in a suburb of Chicago called Cicero. Working class white suburb, which means that the suburb would have been largely made up of Polish and Irish Americans. Irish Americans in particular have always been sort of in the same space, competing for jobs, competing for housing, competing for respect. So we've always kind of been competitors in a sense. And that's not to say that Irish Americans haven't been frontline in the civil rights movement and all of that, because they have. But there's always been that kind of a jostle at the bottom to kind of get the same things. In the 1860s, during the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln issued conscription, the Irish in New York had what's called, had a riot basically, and said that they weren't going to join the Union Army to free Black people. And they also, they hung people, Black people, from lampposts. But that has to do not only with racism, but it has to do also with the fighting for place. Because in a lot of instances, the only thing that saved Irish Americans from the fate of white people was the color of their skin. And a lot of people escaped into the color of their skin. And Trump uses that, particularly for working class Irish people. We call working class middle class in the United States. But particularly for middle class people, Trump goes back to white privilege, and he goes there and uses that language unconsciously. I mean, they pick it up. They pick it up as a dog whistle and all the things that he's saying to sort of give them the feeling that they're still in the game. Because affirmative action, which was a big part of my upbringing, affirmative action which allowed universities and mandated universities to allow African Americans into schools to correct systemic racism, but didn't let Irish kids in. And so they would have been in the same kind of category, but were excluded from this definition. And a lot of people still hold that in resentment. And Trump taps into that. Although the sort of contradiction is, of course, the Irish American community voted for Barack Obama and Joe Biden, not once, but twice. So it was a bit of a shock for the Democratic Party to see that there was this cadre of people who were very discontented about the fact that they were left behind, and they feel left behind in the whole arc of this sort of American story. And a lot of their primacy in the cities has been lessened because the cities have lost steel work, have lost a lot of the sort of Rust Belt work that was the bread and butter of the Irish community. Also, there's an opioid epidemic as well. There is a huge opioid epidemic that Trump does not address, but is decimating the Irish American community. It's a huge tragedy. But we're not allowed to talk about it, because to talk about it would be to bring on the sort of solidarity that the Irish Americans have with working class African Americans and Latinos too.
I guess Trump did address it in his inauguration speech, but whether he's actually done anything is
That's right.
discussion. The Trump administration has a lot of Irish Americans in it. does that dismay you? When I see the name of Mulvaney, Sean Spicer, Pence, Bannon, General Kelly, they seem to be, when they were fleetingly in the administration, were the force, and they're Irish Americans. Does that dismay you that they're part of such a right-wing project?
No, because they've tapped into the whole narrative that I just said about lacking privilege or losing privilege. So even though these are very privileged people, they can turn around and look at their communities, as you just said, and see them decimated by the opioid epidemic, see them decimated by the lack of jobs in the steel industry and so forth, and say, I'm going to be on this side, and I'm going to stay on this side, even though, of course, the whole background, mainly of Irish Americans, has been of union activism, has been largely on the left of politics, has been largely for the cause of civil rights and all that. So, but they can sort of turn around and say, but we were left behind in this whole thing.
There is a split personality amongst
Yes.
Irish Americans, in the sense that huge numbers of them voted for Trump,
Yes.
and huge numbers of them voted for Democrats. And
Yes.
traditionally, we in Western Europe assumed that Irish Americans would vote for the Dems,
Yes.
but they actually put Trump into the White House.
Yes.
Why is that split personality? Is it something based on religion? So in other words, this Republican ethos of Roe v. Wade needs to be scrapped, versus the Democrat side, which is more social democrat, kind of liberal attitude. Why is that dichotomy there?
I think he found some anger that hadn't been addressed. I think he found some rage that hadn't been addressed. I think the Obama presidency, by virtue of its existence, was a triumph and a celebration of African Americans in many ways. I never thought I would live to see it. So in a sense, by its very existence, even though the vice president is Irish American, but, and so is Barack Obama, his grandfather is Irish. So,
Money called and awfully.
exactly, he's an Irish American as well. But it was the triumph of African American community. He never hid that, he never talked that down. He never said it wasn't. So it just, in some sense, I'm just thinking about this now as I'm talking to you, I think in a sense it exacerbated a wound that Irish Americans felt in terms of the American dream and the American promise. That even though they are the beneficiaries of it in a huge way, because in my lifetime, we had an Irish American president, and in my lifetime, there was even talk that he wasn't going to be elected because he would owe his allegiance to the Vatican. And this was a real conversation in American public life.
And then Chicago helped him out.
Exactly, Chicago got him over
Yeah.
because of the machine, which is Irish American. So all of that is there in the Irish psyche. It's only 50 years ago. It's not long ago in history. And all of that is sort of baked in.
You're a very proud Chicagoan. You grew up in the West Side.
Shut the South Side.
South Side. You said in your book, A Parallel Life, that you were regularly mugged on the way to the shop to buy cigarettes for your mom.
In the West Side, when I was a little one. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
What's it like there now? Because Trump always talks the city down because he knows he can never get the votes for that city. What's it like now?
Well, I went back a few years ago to make a film for the BBC, and our beautiful house that my father and aunt and uncle and aunt worked so hard to have was a crack den. And I couldn't go close to it. I didn't want to lose the memory of growing up there. It's a neighborhood and a community, even as I was growing up in it 40 years ago, that's pretty much, 50 years ago, that's pretty much riven by gangs and a huge gang culture. But Chicago's always had gangs. Big gangs were Irish gangs at the beginning of the 20th century. And so, and Italian gangs, of course, the mafia, the mob,
Polish gangs.
and yeah, Polish gangs. There's always gangs in Chicago. At this time, they're African American and
Some Puerto Rican?
and Latino, yes, Puerto Rican.
So does that mean you avoid the city, or would you still regard yourself as a proud Chicagoan?
Yes, my accent is Chicago, as far as I've got one still. And my mother and father buried there. And it's where I was educated. And it's where I got into the theater, into the cinema, and also where I became an activist. So Chicago is very much, I lived in New York for a long time, but Chicago is very much where I'm from.
You lived in New York in the early 80s, the theatre scene, and you loved it. But you left because you wanted to escape the shadow of death.
Yes,
Because a lot of your friends were dying of AIDS.
yes.
Tell me more about that phase.
Well, in the theater in those days, of course, AIDS in the beginning of the 80s, people didn't know what it was. So, as a consequence, you had a huge community of people who were ostracized, who weren't physically touched, and became their own community.